Martin Luther, the reformer, once called the letter of James an epistle of straw. Now, he included in the canon of Scripture, he saw the book of James as scriptural, but it was not his favorite book, and it was not held in the same esteem as Paul's letters. Luther, he made that judgment because he felt that James did not articulate the gospel clearly enough. Indeed, words like cross, salvation, redemption, saved, they never actually appear in the letter. Now, I have to say that I disagree with Luther. The Epistle of James is perhaps my favorite book in the Bible, particularly in that time when I was learning about what it meant to be a Christian. See, James doesn't set out to articulate a theology per se. What he attempts to do, however, is articulate how Christian people are to live in this world. James is very much a boots on the ground kind of person, and it's that type of letter. So the question he addresses really can be summed up like this. So now you are a Christian, right? Now you believe in Jesus. Now you belong to the community of faith. Now what? What does that actually mean for your life? The portion of James that we read today articulates the way of life that we are called to live. We as Christian people are called to live in a specific way. The person and the power of Jesus is to flow through us in such a way that there's a difference in how we live. Although he doesn't use this term, we could say that James talks about what it means to live a life of holiness. Or to put it another way, what does it mean to have Jesus change your life? How do we live out our faith? How do you live out your faith? If you want to follow along, I invite you to pick up your Bibles and turn to James chapter 3. Reading begins with the basic premise that everything that we say that we believe, it needs to be lived out in our lives. And in fact, if we don't live it out in our lives, can we actually say that we believe it? Right? The classic example, if you say that you believe that the chair will hold your weight, but you refuse to sit down, do you actually believe it? So our beliefs have to be lived out. Right? And so James says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by a good life, by deeds done in gentleness, and that comes from wisdom. Right? Who is wise and understanding among you? James, he's not just talking about smarts. He is using kind of technical language that was used to describe the religious leaders of the day. So he's talking about people who understand faith, people who are informed in the way of faithful living. So he says, if you're going to be like that, you need to show it out. You need to show it in your lives. Because we are not just bobblehead Christians. Right? We are not Christians just with a head full of knowledge about God, but a body which is essentially disconnected. Faith needs to be embodied in our lives. A Christian faith that is not lived out is not a Christian faith at all. A Christian faith that is not lived out is not a Christian faith at all. The gospel, truth of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection doesn't just change what we believe, it changes how we live. We show it out, James says, by a good life, by deeds done in gentleness. Now, with this verse, we kind of do have to go back to the Greek, because the Greek translation gives it a little bit more nuance. In the Greek, James writes, the word for good is actually the word kalos, which more appropriately is translated beautiful or lovely. Gentleness is taken from the word for humility or the word for submission. Think of a horse submitting to the influence of a bridle. So what James really says is that we show our faith through a lovely life, through a life of love, and through deeds rooted in submission. Deeds rooted in the influence of Jesus on our life and being willing to follow that. So you can ask yourself, how does Jesus have influence in your life? Where does Jesus show up? Where does the influence of Jesus become shown in how you live or how you speak to people or how you treat others? Can you point to anything that says, can you point to any actions, can you point to any behaviors and say, I behave like this, I act like this because of Jesus in my life. I act like this because I'm a Christian. I do this because of my faith. These are important questions that we ask ourselves. And again, as I was learning about what it meant to be a person of faith, these were important things to think about. James talks about all this type of thing. Right? He talks about giving to others. He talks about the speech that we use, how we talk to each other. And in our section here, in order to depict really what this looks like, James contrasts this with the alternative way. Right? James contrasts the holy life with a life which is based on cultivating bitter envy or selfish ambition, a life turned in on itself. Bitter envy and selfish ambition, they are about this self-focused desire to exalt ourselves, often in relation to other people or at the expense of other people. Bitter envy is a negation of our belovedness. We fill our lives with a lie that says that there is nothing good in us. We deny the truth about who we are. We deny the truth about God's love for us, and we become deaf to God's voice of love over us. Because we begin to continually look at other people and say, I need to be like them. How come I am not as successful as that person? How come I'm not as rich as that person? How come I'm not as beautiful as that person? How come they're getting all the benefits? How come they're getting all the chances? How come they? How come they? How come they? How come they? And so when we think about that and we continually live in a sense of comparison with other people, our soul begins to feel heavier and heavier by the constant feeding of negativity that we give to it. And when we live in that way, it completely colors our entire life and we turn away from the Spirit. Because we are solely focused on meeting the expectations which are met in other people, but we don't think are met in us. Similarly, selfish ambition is kind of the flip side of that. It is this selfish desire for the exaltation of the self, often at the expense of other people. I need to be better than them. I need to be more successful, more beautiful, more rich, more. I need to progress. It's this constant desire to get ahead. Because the more I have, the better I am. And I don't really care who suffers in my way. Right? Other people are but obstacles to get around. Or they are pawns to be used for my advancement. Or they are enemies to be thwarted. Because in the end, it's just about me. It's just about my way. It's just about my life. It's just about my wants. And James says that if we harbor this life, if we house this type of living, this type of attitude in our hearts, so that it grows wider and wider and wider, it essentially leads to our spiritual ruin. This way of life destroys our ability to experience or express the love of God. Because we are too busy being negative upon ourselves to experience the love of God, or we're too busy trying to leap over other people and to muscle our way through life that we do not express the love of God. Is that the life that we are called into? Is that the life that Jesus wants for us? No, James says that this is an earthly life. This is unspiritual. It's of the devil. It leads to our spiritual ruin. It drives us away from God. Because where we cultivate this attitude, he says, we have every evil practice. Right? Because we try to overcome this envy, or we try to promote our ambition through any means necessary, with our eyes focused only on ourselves, rather on the Spirit of God. James says later, you have fights and you have quarrels among you. You kill and you covet. Right? This is where it goes to. It destroys our Christian life. It destroys Christian community. Because if we approach the living out of our life in a way that says, it is my way beyond anything, right? This is all about what I want or what I want to see. We will always look for ways to exert our wishes over others. And if we live in a way that filters everything through bitterness, then we will never experience the joy which is available to us. Everything will be criticized. Everything will be demeaned. And so James writes to the Christian community, he writes to you and to me, he writes to us. And he says, now that you are a community of Christ, you don't live like that. This isn't how you live. Turn away from that life. And if you see the instance of this rising up, then you resist it. Because if you want to live out your faith in a way that God inspires you to do so in the heavenly way, he says, the heavenly wisdom is this. Your life must be like this. First of all, pure, peace-loving, considerate, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. We could take 10 sermons to go through each of those words. But notice that all of those words are relational. See, where bitter envy and selfish ambition was life just really about me, these words are relational. We are people of love and we are people of peace. We are people of mercy. We are considerate and we are mindful of people, of the high and the low and the rich and the poor. The entire spectrum of people are worthy of our respect and our care. Just as God was considerate and loving, and that's the basis of God's enfleshment in Jesus, so we are called to be considerate. We are called to be sincere. What you see is what you get. No falsity with us. We are called to be willing to yield. Isn't that a great phrase? Solomon had bowling yesterday, so we drove down south, and as we drove, I was wondering how many accidents would occur if every driver on the road assumed that everybody else would just yield to them. Imagine if there was no yielding at all. And often, sometimes on Deerfoot, there's not a whole lot, but imagine if that was kind of systematic for everybody. What if, after church, we went out into the parking lot and we got into our cars and we had this thought that we have the right of way, or I have the right of way in every situation. Every single intersection, every single turn, every single merge lane, every single instance of me in the car, it is my right to drive how I want. I will drive in the way that I want, and everybody else, they're going to fall in around me. I don't have to yield to anybody. How disastrous would that be? It would be pandemonium. And ultimately, it would be incredibly dangerous to us, to our physical lives, and possibly end in our destruction. As we live out our Christian lives, are we willing to yield to others? Are you willing to give other people the right of way? To yield to the Spirit of God? Are we willing to give up a fight for the sake of experiencing or expressing the love of God? As you recognize God's love for other people, as you live humbly in this world, can you yield up your own will, your own way, and lay it down for the sake of somebody else, to care for them, to build them up, to bless them? Can you lay down your own moment in the spotlight in order to bless somebody else? Can you experience the mercy of God, and can you express that to other people? Can you be sincere? Are you authentically embodying what it means to be a follower of Jesus? Now, these are tall orders. And how they're going to interact with each of our lives is going to be a little bit different for each and every single one of us. But James puts forward quite a high call for holy living. He depicts in practical manners what this looks like. Now, none of us are perfect. That's why humility is so important. None of us have so progressed to a point where we have it all figured out. there are times where we might be too envious of others around us. It happens to us all. There are times where we might all of a sudden find that bitterness has taken just a little bit too big of a hold on our lives. Or maybe we don't yield enough. Maybe we have a hard time expressing peace in the midst of conflict or hurt. The only way to progress in this type of life, the only way to make strides in this call to holy living, is to remain close to God. So our reading ends, submit, and we might use the word yield. Submit, yield yourself to God. Resist the devil, resist the way of life that leads you away from God. Resist that, and the devil will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. For the places where we are strong in the Christian life, how do you invite Jesus in? To glorify him. In the places of our struggle, how do we invite Jesus into those places? To help us, to maybe correct us. Our Christian life can only be lived when we live it with God. And the more that we are connected with God, the more that we are connected with the Spirit of God, the more we allow God to have influence over our lives. The more we open ourselves to Jesus, the easier it is to live in this way. The easier it is that we find to show mercy, to be considerate, to yield, to be humble. And so for the areas that we may struggle in our Christian lives, the way we begin to address those things is to draw nearer and nearer to Christ, to allow his voice to hold sway over us. The holy life to which we are called is the life we continually work towards. And the holiness of life that we assert, the holiness of life that we say that we believe in, has to be the holiness of life that we live out. May we all draw near to God and in his power, live out our faith in love with deeds rooted in humility and peace. Amen.